If you can imagine a dog or a puppy who was so overstimulated by things that they could feel, things they could touch, things they could see, things they could hear, that they lost all confidence. If you could imagine such a dog, then you could imagine my sixth dog named DeCaff. I'm going to share with you 12 lessons and 2 reflections that I learned from training and owning and loving DeCaff, including one that I can't believe I'm going to talk about publicly because I honestly feel a little bit ashamed about this lesson. Now, DeCaff was 3/4 Jack Russell Terrier or 1/4 Border Collie, and I got her kind of unexpectedly and unplanned. She was brought in for training. The family owned several dogs of their own and had 2 small children, so I knew DeCaff wasn't going to work out. Plus, I fell in love with her. For some reason, right at the airport, I called the family. I said, you know what? I'll help you with your next dog. And so I ended up buying her from them. They were completely happy about it. DeCaff was born on Valentine's Day, the year 2000, so 23 years ago. Yet these are lessons that are still so powerful to me. I think of DeCaff when I'm helping students that have similar problems. We actually have several games in our online programs that are there because of what I learned through DeCaff. She was a typical terrier puppy in that she was rambunctious and sassy and loved to play, but I knew right away there was something a little bit off about her. At 9 weeks old, I was doing a demonstration and she actually attacked another little 9-week-old Daxi puppy, and not like bug off, like attacked. We had to pull her off of this poor puppy. And so I thought that was a little bit strange. Yes, I'd had terriers for decades up to that point, but it was still something strange and new to me. Now, DeCaff was certainly friendly enough to people. She loved being out. She wasn't fearful about new environments, although she was very concerned about new textures on her feet. And so when we put up our dog training building, we put a sand ring in there. And a couple of years later, we changed from a sand ring to a rubber floor. And she didn't like that. So she would train on that rubber floor, but as soon as any action had stopped, she would immediately find a cloth chute from a collapsed tunnel. Back in the day, we used to use those in agility. And she would run over and stand on it. And she would wait there until it was her turn next to go. She did not want to leave the security of the cloth tunnel. It was different than that rubber floor, and she wasn't stepping on that rubber floor until she had to step on the rubber floor. Likewise, if she was around a tent and the wind blew, the sounds of the tents flapping or a flag flapping put her off to the point where she soon grew to not like the feel of the wind blowing, maybe because of what it was going to predict, or maybe she just didn't like the wind as well. So the first lesson I took on board with DeCaff is that of puppy selection. You know, the dog I had before DeCaff was my red Border Collie, Buzz, who I wrote the book Shaping Success all about. And so when DeCaff suddenly became my dog, I thought, what am I going to call her? And I thought after a Buzz, everybody should have a DeCaff, and that's how she got her name. Now, I evaluated Buzzy at 7 weeks old. I looked at his litter, and I saw all these structural faults within him. But oh my gosh, he had so much drive, so much keenness to work, so much willingness to want to do anything with me. And I thought, this is going to be a fun dog to train, and I took him. And so with DeCaff, I was like, awestruck by her great structure. So most terriers have a very upright shoulder. She had the Border Collie shoulder. She had a lovely lay of shoulder, beautiful, beautiful structure. And that's all that mattered, because I figured I can't dog train structure, but I can dog train everything else. Oh, nay, nay, to quote the late John Panay. Yes, you can dog train some things, but they take a lot of work. And so moving forward beyond DeCaff, I said, when I'm looking for my next puppy, yes, I want lovely structure. Yes, I want all that good drive, but I also want to consider, what do the parents look like? What do the parents' siblings look like? What about all the other puppies in the litter? Now, for those of you getting a rescue dog, this is going to be easy. Your heart's going to help you make that decision. Really, that's going to be the primary factor. But lesson number 1 with DeCaff is all about puppy selection, and it's got to be the whole package. It can't just be one thing. Of course, when I'm going to a breeder and looking for a new puppy, the number one concern I have is the health of the parents, the health of the parents' parents, or the health of the parents' sibs, et cetera, et cetera. And then it goes to structure and temperament and drive and balance. That's what I'm looking for. Okay, so now I have this puppy that I'm seeing all these behavioral challenges. And at that point, I took some behavior courses in university, but I really considered myself a dog trainer. And when I look at what I know now as a dog trainer, what I knew back then was pretty lacking. And so I trained DeCaff here at home, and she had fun. She loved to tug. She loved food, except in new environments. Then maybe tug not all the time, and definitely not food all the time. So tug had a higher rating to her than food, but definitely neither one were the gaga thing that made everything come together and make it make sense to her. And so this crazy avoidance of things under her feet really came into vision when we went to Florida. She was about 11 months old, and I was super excited. We'd done all the little pieces to work on her contacts, and I was going to put it all together once we got to an environment in Florida where I could train outside. And so we get out of the motorhome, and she hits the grass like a bucking bronco. She is jumping up and down, and she has to get back in the motorhome. And I'm like, this is so weird. And I thought, well, there's some agility equipment over there. I'm going to go over there, and I'm going to use the agility equipment to get her excited. So I take her over, put her on the dog walk, and she's fine up there. And I put my hand out to do some hand touches while she's on the dog walk. Yes, I can do that. Gave her some cookies, put it down lower where she had to touch her feet to the ground. She hit the ground and backed all the way back up the dog walk. We don't do this here. And that carried on after I left Florida. I went and taught a seminar in Houston, and they had what they called hog fuel, which is like, I think, a lot of manure mixed with dirt for the foundation of where I was teaching. That didn't go over well with Miss D. And then I went to California, where I was actually teaching in an olive orchard with dead olives on the ground. She did not like that one little bit. And so lesson number 2 that I engaged in all of those environments was the importance of arousal states. You can hear me talk about arousal states in podcast episode 86 here on Shaped by Dog. But when the dog is at a lower end of the arousal curve, aka the Yerkes-Dodson's curve, at the left-hand side is when dogs aren't really excited and they're really not very aroused, and they're going to notice insignificant things in their environment. They're going to notice the olives under their feet. They're going to notice, ew, this grass is really, really wet. They're going to notice these things. Now, could I have trained DeCaff in those surfaces? Yes, but I would have got a dog with a lot less joy. I would have got a dog without putting their whole self into the training, because they constantly would have been on high alert for what is weird next. And so I lowered my criteria for what it is we're going to do. We're not going to do agility contacts. That's what I had planned. But guess what? You can write the plan, but the dog dictates the pace of that plan. And so all that I did is, can I get you to the point where you can play recaller games, where I can get you to tug and release the tug, where I can get you to chase and then tug without noticing the things in your environment? And that was huge for DeCaff. We did progress our training in all of those environments, because guess what? We progressed the joy. The next lesson I learned. Now, I knew Dee needed some extra oomph. And of course, if you follow my podcast, you know my dogs all have nicknames. So I called her D-Dog when she was really, really young. And then I started calling her my D-Dog. That you are my D-Dog. And why am I sharing all this with you? Because when you say mighty dog really fast, it turns into mighty dog. And that's who I wanted her to believe she was. You are my D-Dog. You're a mighty dog. And one day I heard, and I've talked, and I've shared this story on the podcast, somebody calling her Deke the Freak, because, hello, she did do some weird things. However, that environment is not helpful for my dog. That environment is not helpful for me. I spoke about that recently on podcast episode 228. Now, DeCaff started out her competition career very slowly, because she was still worried about things. Honestly, she didn't run as fast at a trial as she did at home until she was 5 years old. Now, if I had her today, I know I would do better, but that's the way it was back in the early 2000s. But guess what? DeCaff eventually got faster. And she won some regional championships. And then she won some national championships. And then before her career was over, she was a 3-time all-round world champion in the sport of dog agility. Now, when she won her first regional championship, I got a note from a friend of mine who said, please don't take this the wrong way, because I always knew you'd work through these problems your dog had, but I never in a million years dreamt she would have success on the same level your past dogs had. And I wrote back one line, and it was, when I look at my dogs, all I see is greatness. To me, my dogs are just unpolished diamonds, and I'm the polisher. What I do, the choices I make, help them to shine at their brightest. And so lesson number 3 for me is you have got to create a positive environment for both yourself and your dog. Don't allow anybody to speak badly, and don't you ever speak badly. Don't ever define the dog by their limitations. Don't call them a scaredy cat dog, a shutdown dog, whatever. Mighty dog. What is the opposite? What is a word that can make sense to your brain? Is she a mighty dog? Well, at first she wasn't, but she was always my D dog. So she became that mighty dog in my mind. You know, my friend, therapist, Elliott Connie, I've spoke about him in the past. And last week he had a meme posted to social media, and it went something like this. Your worth is not defined by others' opinion of you, but rather of your own self-perception. Now, you can take that and turn it into your dog. Your dog's worth is not defined by other people's opinion of them, but of your perception of them. No dog has ever surpassed the perception their owner has of them. You need to see your dog in the absolute best light possible for your dog ever to have a chance of shining their light. But as long as they're kept down, even by the energy, the toxic energy in the environment, they're never going to be who they could be. And that's a real shame. While we were on that trip to Florida, my late husband, John, grabbed a fly swatter to kill a fly in the motorhome. And when he smacked the fly on the counter, DeCaff broke out of a sound sleep and just flew at John, jumped up and bit him. I think she got him either in the leg or the arm. I know John was none too happy. And immediately I went, well, what did I just see? That was a spark. That was a lightning bolt of fire I have never seen in that dog. So I took the fly swatter and I smacked it on the counter myself, and she came at me. It was kind of scary, but it was super fun. And right then I decided you can either counter condition this response. So I have a dog that has a normal response to a fly swatter, or you can use this in your training. And of course, hello, I'm a dog trainer at heart. I live in Canada. We only have flies a few months of the year. Ding, ding, giddy up. Let's go with this fly swatter. And so I had my dog's number one reinforcer. Now, my first dog, Shelby, who was crazy about rocks, taught me that it's the dog who defines what's the value. And DeCaff just underlined it. So that was lesson number 4. Be sure never to force what you think is important on the dog when you're picking their best reinforcer. So for DeCaff, I had this amazing reinforcement that now I could use in my training. And anytime she saw it, she lost her mind. Her favorite thing in the world was to take a fly swatter, go for a victory lap run, and then rip it to bits. Needless to say, we went through a lot of fly swatters during our career and training. But that was okay, because guess what? They were not that expensive. Plus, so many of my students thought it was so much fun to bring DeCaff fun fly swatters. Now, here's the thing about having a go-to reinforcement, one that sends your dog into another orbit, is people stop there. So what I did was I realized I had some great thing here. And so I went out onto that Florida grass, and I put the fly swatter up my shirt and kind of tucked in my waistband. And I went out and I got her to tug. And I got some kind of mediocre tug. Yeah, a little bit of good tug, a little bit of mew. As soon as I got a really good tug, I said to her, actually I called it the DeWater. DeWater! And I pulled it out from behind my back and I started smacking it on my legs. And she again went crazy, grabbed the fly swatter. Now, I put it back behind my back. This time I didn't tuck it in anywhere. I just tucked it in my waistband. Why bother? The dog knows that it's there now, right? And I asked for some more tug. Yes, the tug would have instantly got better. I did a few more. Here's your water. and tug and water and tug, only 2 or 3. The most important repetition on that whole sequence, believe it or not, it isn't the last one, although you do want them to have really high intensity on that last one. The most important one is the first one, because you want to see, are we getting a transfer of value? The next time we come out to play tug in the grass, is the first repetition more intense than the last? And by golly, it was. Every time we went out, it got more and more and more intense. So lesson number 5 is the transfer of value, the critical importance of a transfer of value. You can't take something your dog loves and then think you're just going to hide it or pretend you have it in your pocket, and give it to somebody else. Dogs aren't stupid. What you have to do is transfer that value onto another toy, I transferred it to food. So she had high drive for the food. I transferred it to obstacles. I could use the fly swatter. I could pull it out after she did a little sequence when she least expected. So the first time was always hidden. And then I could go back and forth between tug and a fly swatter, because let's face it, a fly swatter isn't always the most convenient thing to have hanging around when you're at an agility trial. Although, yeah, I took them there too. The transfer of value is what turned my dog from a dog who could do the sport to a dog who was gaga to do the sport. Okay, the next lesson I got from DeCaff came when we were selected to go to the Great Outdoor Games, the ESPN Great Outdoor Games. It was quite an honor to be one of the dogs selected. I can't remember, a handful of dogs in 2 different jump heights. That's all they took. And it was $10,000 on the line for the winner of each of those categories. And I was super excited that DeCaff was selected. The only problem was DeCaff was not fond of the heat. And the Great Outdoor Games that year were going to be in Reno, Nevada. And when I say she wasn't fond of the heat, that's not uncommon with dogs who struggle with motivation issues. They don't want to play the game when it's in the heat of the day. And so I knew, I was very strategic about that with DeCaff, that at an agility trial, I brought out the fly swatters during the heat of the day. So I had her tug on toys during most classes. And then when it was the hottest out, she got a fly swatter at the end as her reward when we were done. And when I was at home, I trained her in the cool of the morning and the cool of the night. I never, ever trained her outside between the hours of like 10 and 3 in the afternoon in the summer heat. Just didn't bother because she didn't like it. Okay, here we are going to Reno, Nevada. Now, as a side note, after my first run, looked at the thermometer they had on the ground. It was 122 degrees Fahrenheit. So hot that actually I came out of the ring and I broke out into shingles for the first time in my life. But that's another story. And so what could I do? I could go and take this dog who really didn't want to be there. But what could I do with my dog who didn't like the heat? And spoiler alert, she won the $10,000 that year. What did you do, Susan? Well, I knew I had to train her in the heat of the day. No more training late in the afternoon or in the early morning. I had to plan. So I started my plan back in May. As soon as it got a little bit warm out, I checked the weather forecast, picked the hottest days and the hottest hours of those days. And what I would do is I would set up something that I knew was her worst obstacle. Now, looking back, maybe I would pick her best, but I don't know that I was wrong. Her worst obstacle in the heat was weave pulls. And so what I did was I set the weave pulls up going into the pond, and I would have her go out in the stinking heat where she barely would tug. I did get her to tug. How did I do that? With my fly swatter. So I would go out, ask her to tug, got some limp tug like I did in Florida, and then occasionally I'd pull out the fly swatter as a reward. Then one set of weave pulls, go for a swim into the pond, one of her favorite activities, back in the house. So for the first week, it was like 1 rep back in the house. And then we do 2 reps. And then I would do like a tunnel to the weave poles and then maybe a couple of jumps to the tunnel to the weave poles. You see where I'm going? By the time we got to the Great Outdoor Games in July, she was doing full courses before she went in the pond and loving it. No longer afraid of the heat. No longer balking because it's too hot. I don't do this stuff in the heat. So that leads me to the 6th lesson. When you have a challenge, take the challenge out of your training. Now, I could have just got agility sequences, left them out on the agility field, and kept training her in the heat and hoping she would get used to it. Or I took the problem, I don't want to be in the heat, and I dealt with that alone. with the fly swatter and the tug. And then I did one thing you love. I mean, she loved in the heat of the day to go for a swim. So I combined those things. Take your challenge out of your training. The longer you keep the challenge in the training, the more you're building that malaise, that lack of motivation into the training that you're trying to improve. And it just doesn't make sense. So lesson number 6, take the problem out of your training. Now, I'm going to share with you one of the reflections. So that's 6 lessons. I got 6 more I'm going to share with you, including the one I wasn't sure if I should share. But the reflection that I have, and this one is a recent one, and it was really looking back over the 3 dogs that I learned so much from. DeCaff, Buzz, and this. The 3 dogs that were my toughest dogs to train. The 3 dogs that I learned so much from. And I always had this mindset that, these challenges bring the gems of great lessons. And it's true. Within all challenges, there are some amazing lessons for us. But challenges don't always equal knowledge. Challenge plus curiosity equals knowledge. You don't automatically get the lessons unless you're curious to find them. But here's my big reflection. Even though challenges bring lessons, lessons do not require challenge. And that's a mindset that I have recently become aware of. And it's an important lesson for me to be aware of, because the question is, have I been putting out the thought out into the universe or to God that I need these lessons because I'm this worldly dog trainer and I'm supposed to be helping everyone. So just send me all the problems so I can figure it out so I can help so many people. And the answer is no. You can learn by being curious, not of just your own dogs. Be curious of other people. I love helping other people, but that curiosity that I have with my own dogs now, I know that curiosity can equal lessons without having the pain and the frustration of all the challenges that I've lived through to bring me those lessons. So I hope you think about that as a reflection for yourself. Knowledge is there available for you as long as you're curious. I'm going to share a massive epiphany that absolutely changed DeCaff's life for agility. At the time, she was weaving her weave pulls, which should take about, for a small dog, 2.5 seconds. And when she first started her first trial, I think they were 10-second weave pulls. So my big epiphany for that, I'm going to share with you the massive lesson that DeCaff gave me on the use of timeouts in dog training. And I've got 4 more plus a big, big reflection. But I've got 6 brand new lessons, equally as important. One very, very painful. I had to rehearse how I was going to share this one with you because it's a biggie for me. Now, the first lesson I'd like to share is a dog shutting down when you're training them is feedback to you on your training. And let me tell you the backstory on this. Now, DeCaff was brilliant at some behaviors in agility. She could turn so tightly, and her running contacts were not too difficult to train to her. What was difficult is getting her to open her stride, particularly if it was a spread jump upcoming, or leaving out strides when there was big distances. And worst of all, the worst thing for me was her weave pulls. And her weave pulls, when we started out, were so unbelievably slow. So a dog of her size might do weave pulls in 2.5 seconds. That might be a good dog of her size, like a fast one. DeCaff was not double that. She wasn't just 5 seconds. At one point, she was like close to 10 seconds. And I obviously didn't let her rehearse that. I didn't let her do complete sets of weave pulls. But the problem was, as I observed it, she would bounce. And I just looked at it and thought, this is a terrier, straight in the shoulder. She would bounce way up in the air in between each pull. She would bounce so high up in the air that she would sometimes get out of rhythm and had to walk in between to catch up and then That's why things are so slow. Now, those of you who have no interest in agility, you may be thinking, why is this important to me? It's super important to you, trust me, because it's just dog behavior. It's just how that behavior should be feedback to us. Now, I asked all my professional friends in the elites of dog agility, and I got some interesting different things I could try. One of them was put a rope above her head so that when she bounced, she would touch the rope, and then you could just lower the rope to get her to don't bounce as high. Have you met my friend DeCaff? Yeah, the one that doesn't like anything touching her that's new. I knew that wasn't going to work so swell. I didn't want to be a negative Nelly, but that wasn't one that I went too far with. And so I kept at it. And one day we were practicing weave pulls, no ropes involved. We were practicing weave pulls. I remember exactly where we were in the building. And I don't know what repetition it was of weaving. I don't know if I was feeling frustrated, but all I know was in the middle of the training, my dog stopped. She stopped and she would not go back in the weave pulls. She looked at me, she sniffed the floor, she sat down, she scratched her collar. All signs of obvious stress. Now, DeCaff is not the first dog in the world to ever shut down in training. I can tell you she's the first dog of mine who ever shut down in training. And people have said to me, my dog always shuts down. And I would like you to recognize that that dog shutting down to me was like a dagger through my heart. Because why do I train? I train to bring more joy into your life. What did I just do? If you and I were just hanging out, sitting on the couch, you wouldn't have had any worry or concern. If you and I were just going for a walk in the woods, you wouldn't have had any reason to look at me with those eyes that you looked at me with. Training's supposed to bring more joy. Training's supposed to deepen our bond. Training's supposed to bring a better relationship. This dog said, I don't feel comfortable doing this anymore. Now, remember, I did not train this dog with any form of physical corrections or verbal intimidation. Just like Buzzy, all of her behaviors were shaped. But yet, she was as frustrated with training weave pulls as I was. And because that moment was so emotionally powerful to me, it never happened again. I would never allow it to happen again. I would video my training. I would set timers. I would journal. I just got more intent about it so that I looked for any obvious signs of stress. And then I would go, you've done it again. And I would go, how many sessions could I go where there's no signs of stress? Those are the ones that count, not the ones that, I see a sign of stress and then I'm going to stop it, because that leads to the dog shutting down earlier and earlier. All right. So that big lesson is that the dog's behavior is nothing more than a critique of your training, your ability to plan the training, and your ability to execute on that training. And so if the dog is not feeling the joy, then you, my friend, have flawed in that planning or that executing. One of the things that I did back then in the early 2000s is I would give my dogs a timeout, or I use a non-reward marker occasionally in weave pulls, especially when they would get a wrong entry. And the non-reward marker would just say, that's not correct, come on back and try it again. Well, that's one of the big lessons that I got from DeCaff is if you have a well-planned and well-executed training plan, then non-reward markers and timeouts are never required in training. However, never is such an absolute. I want to leave just a little wiggle room. My goal is to never, ever use non-reward markers, or my goal is to never use timeouts in any of my training, especially with a puppy or a young adolescent dog. That's my goal. And so if I've planned and executed it and given my dog amazing foundation, it shouldn't happen. Now, what brought me to this was I noticed with DeCaff, when I would give her a timeout, I would pick her up to walk her towards her crate. She would redirect, not on me, but she would start growling at other dogs as we went by. When I put her in her crate, she would immediately spin around and start biting the bars of the crate. It's obvious frustration, aggression, obvious, a redirection of I don't get what you're doing this to me for, because I barely like what we're doing anyway. And so that was a big neon light to me, and I eliminated any kind of timeouts with her very early in her career when I picked that one up. And today, I can't tell you a time where I say, I will use a timeout if. Now, will I get frustrated and put my dog up? Yes, I will. 9 times out of 10, I'll put them up with a handful of cookies thrown in their crate because I need the timeout, not the dog needing the timeout. Lesson number 3, never sidestep the lesson the dog is trying to share with you. And if you haven't, please watch my video, The Journey, because this goes back to how our dogs come into our lives to share lessons with us. Now, DeCaff, as I've mentioned, was very touch sensitive. So when she was young, with all my dogs, I play a game called Smack the Baby. Smack the baby, as they tug, I would smack them on the ribs, not hard, like it would start off just little love pats, and then I'd smack them harder, because if you've seen 2 dogs play, they're very rambunctious. They love to smack each other around. My dogs love Smack the Baby. And I would play it all over their body. Like at first it would just be in their ribs and it might be a gentle push, then in their shoulders. And then as they're tugging, I'd like smack them in their muzzle. Well, DeCaff, when I played Smack the Baby with her, she loved it up to the shoulders. We no play Smack the Baby above the shoulders, mama. No. And so what she would do is, as we were playing tug and I'd smack the baby and she loved it, as soon as I got near the crest of her shoulder, she just dropped the toy and then bounced around waiting for me to give it to her again. So the lesson is, if I was present to that, what she was saying, it would have eliminated so many struggles for me later on. Emotions need to be dealt with before you go on and train behaviors. Now, DeCaff was telling me, I don't want you to play Smack the Baby because I don't like you touching me there. Now, if we were lying on the couch and I patted her face, there was no problem. But here's where the big lesson came to me. I was teaching in Northern California. A student had given me this little toy for her. It was a tiny, tiny little tennis ball on a little rope. I gave it to her. I was on a break. She went out in the ball field and she was just running with this little toy. And as she ran, it started to bounce. And as it got higher and higher, eventually it touched her muzzle. She dropped it and then scurried away from it like it had burnt acid all over her face. And then she immediately dove on the toy again, started running again until it bounced on her face again. Same thing, spit the toy out, dove away from it like, who did that to me? The light bulb came on huge for me. I realized at that moment the lesson that I had been sidestepping. The lesson that my dog was trying to guide me to was, I'm not comfortable with anything touching my face. Weave pulls, she wasn't bouncing because of a shoulder. She was bouncing to get away from the pulls. She didn't want those things touching her shoulders or her face. Oh, Susan. Oh, the agony you could have done without had you realized that. I didn't go back to work right away. I took that ball and I played tug with her and I tried one finger to touch her muzzle. She wouldn't let me do it. All right, that's fine. I know where the counter conditioning can begin. And so I worked in my hotel at night. I got her loving Smack the Baby in the face and a Smack the Baby above the shoulders. And when I got home, I played Smack the Baby into the pulleys. So I would put her face up against a weave pole and smack the other side of it as she tugged on the toy. She loved that game. Instantly, her weave poles got twice as fast as they ever were, like in one session, just by teaching her how good it was to have the poles touch her face. The dog's sharing that lesson. Be present to the lesson. And emotions, the emotion of fear, always has got to be the priority in your training over a behavior you just want to train. Lesson number 4, you will never be able to truly help a dog that you've labeled or are comparing. And I was very good at sticking up for Dee and calling her my D dog, but when I would work on things that I was trying to improve with her, things like her stride length and her weave pulls, definitely there was, moments of frustration. And the frustration had to have come from a place of lack, of limitation, of you're not there yet, of I need this. And training coming from that place, you are saying that the dog has disappointed you. Now, worse than that is people calling their dogs a sucky baby or a bar knocker or an aggressive dog. Because when you put a label on your dog, you've put a limitation, a ceiling on who they can become. Because you have immediately said, my work here is done. I've done the best job I can with a shutdown dog. It's not on me, it's on that dog because that's who the dog is. So it's super, super important when you're training your dog that you acknowledge the limitations, but you focus on the joy and the improvement. You need to shine your light on who that dog is and don't try to make them be someone they're not. Guess what? No matter how much encouraging, I could hire the best coaches in the world, and they will never be able to coach me to be anything more than 5'2" tall. However, there's a lot of skills that I could improve. By labeling a dog, you are considering that their limitation is a part of their physical makeup. It's who they are, and that's just not right. Shine your light on where they are great. For DeCaff, it was, man, she could turn tight. Man, she had fast contacts. Man, she loved her seesaw. Those were easy things for me to continue to work on and get better on. And guess what? At the end of the day, she ended up being one of the most consistent, one of the winningest dogs that I owned in my entire agility career. Okay, this next lesson is a tough one for me to share, and it's about the importance of us as humans to release guilt or shame or any angst we have about our dogs, our past dogs, our current dogs, it doesn't matter. So when DeCaff was younger, I had an older Jack Russell Terrier who was pretty much could do no wrong in my mind. Maybe it was because I almost lost her to parvo when she was 9 weeks old. She almost died. It literally was a matter of hours. She had to turn around, and she did. That parvo probably was responsible for her having a heart problem later on in life. And so as she got a little weaker, DeCaff, who could be snarky with other dogs in the house, would occasionally just jump her. For me, it looked like for no reason, she would just jump her. Like it, wasn't like she wanted to kill her, but she was attacking. She was grabbing her. There was never any blood. And I just turned into this mama bear. Like, how dare you do that to Twister? And I remember one time grabbing DeCaff by the collar and just smacking her under the chin. I don't know, 2, 3, 4 times. I was so enraged because Twister was, weak and feeble. And DeCaff, who had some problems with controlling her emotions, but never to that degree. And so when I lost Twister, I had a really hard time connecting with DeCaff. There was something in my human brain that saw her behavior in the past as, almost human attributes. Like, how could you do that to this dog that I loved? There were weeks that went on that I couldn't even train DeCaff. And I'm getting emotional thinking about it. And why am I sharing this story with you? Because I know there's at least one of you listening to this that's hanging on to the same guilt or shame for something you did with your dog. It doesn't serve you. This world is better when more of us can light it up. Holding on to something that's dark is not contributing to the light of the world. And that really is why we are all here. So you need to take that baggage and throw it away. It's not who you are. It's something you did. Your dog forgives you. You need to forgive yourself. I know, as difficult as it was to share that story with each of you, I know I've moved on and I've learned from it. I know that my dogs who lived past DeCaff, that I've had since DeCaff, are better for it. Their lives are fuller. Their lives are more enriched. Because that Susan doesn't live here anymore. And with DeCaff, when I went through those weeks where I just couldn't train her, one day what I did is I brought a dog bed and I brought DeCaff down to the gym. Now, I was grieving and I needed to be okay with how I was feeling and not feeling bad that I couldn't train my dog. And so I brought a dog bed into the gym, and instead of working out, I just sat on the bench and I would throw her cookies in the dog bed. It is not like I was mean to her at any time after Twister's death, but I just couldn't train her. And so every day I would bring her into the gym, and she'd get into the bed and I started to work out and throw her cookies. And then one day I got her up on the treadmill while I was on the rowing machine. And we grew from there to me being able to train her again. Because it was me just saying, let's hang out together. We don't have to accomplish anything. Let's just find some joy in our relationship together. And so that was a very, very tough lesson. But it's super, super important that you don't hang on to any of those dark feelings. They don't allow you to be the best version of yourself today for the dogs that are in your life today. And they don't serve you to bring out the best in you. Lesson number 6. How did I take a dog who could barely weave in her first competition? I think it was 6 seconds before I discovered the dog ball thing, and turn her into a multi-time world champion in dog agility and a multi-time national champion as far as that goes. How did I do that? I did that because of lesson 6. There's a great book by one of my former coaches, Dan Sullivan. It's a business book, but it's really about excellence, and it's called The Gap and the Gain. And so lesson 6 is focusing on where you and your dog have improved. There's going to be a gap between where you are today and where you would like to be. There'll be a gap between where you are and maybe where your dog's litter mate is, or where you are and where you were with a former dog. There's this gap. And when you measure that gap, you're behind. And when you're behind, that sucks. That's not inspiring. That's not moving you to want to get up and do anything. However, where you are today and where you were last week, there's also something, we're going to call that the gain. How far you've come, where you are today and where you were last month. When you focus on the gain, you 100% are motivated to get up and go train that dog. With my current girl, Vissy, that's how we move from joy to joy. It's never about what we haven't done. It's never about how we're limited. It's never about what we lack. It's all about celebrating that gain. And that's what's going to motivate you to keep moving forward with your dog. It's all about connecting with your dog and reminding them how much you love them. You know, we all have a choice to focus on the pain of what we don't have, or to be curious about what else we can learn, to be curious about how to bring more joy into this dog's life, how to bring more joy into your life, into our lives, how to be more grateful. What can I be grateful for today? Those are the things that are contributing to you being excited about getting up and training. And that is the most amazing feeling because it's connecting with that dog. Okay, reflections. In that video, The Journey, that I mentioned earlier in this podcast, and again, if you haven't watched that video, of all the dog training information I've put out, of all of the content that I have in our online classrooms, if there's one clip, one video I would want to be my legacy, it would be the video, The Journey. So please, if you haven't watched it, go back and watch it. There's a line in there where I talk about our dogs are here to bring us lessons. And if we aren't present to the lesson the dog is bringing us, it will come back around again. I believe this, my current border collie, her challenges, the lessons she brought me about the connection between the gut and behavior, the lessons she brought me about altering diets and protein levels were the lessons that DeCaff tried to bring me. That I wasn't present or didn't have enough knowledge to figure that out back in 2000. But all the signs are there. The crazy reactivity as a 9-week-old puppy, her weird dislike of different textures, her weird response to the wind, to other dogs, how sometimes other dogs could be okay, but suddenly she would jump somebody in our house. There were so many signs that it was a gut-brain connection that was related to the food that she was being fed. And her ability, she was being fed the same food all of my other dogs are being fed, but her gut biome was not in a place where she was able to deal with it. And when I thought back on this, her mother had reactivity issues as well. And you could say, well, she was a Jack Russell Terrier, or she was a dog with a gut biome issue. And so I encourage you to go back and watch The Journey. Go back and watch the 2 episodes, episode number 203 and 204, where I talk about my journey with this. And also, when you're planning your training, make sure you leave time at the end of every training session to write your thoughts. Of course, what went well, but write down just at the end, especially if you're working on overcoming a challenge, what you love best about your dog. What's amazing about them? What are you grateful for today? I think if you keep putting notes like that, they're like you're writing your dog and yourself love letters. I give Vissy a love letter every single day of her life, maybe multiple times for sure. Before we go to bed, I tell her how much I love her, and I tell her why I think she's so amazing. When you make a habit of being grateful and keep being curious for what else is possible to bring more joy into your dog's life, I promise you it will bring more joy into your life. I hope you enjoyed me sharing the story of my great girl, Mighty Dog. She certainly was a special girl, as all of my dogs were and are. And I hope what this also can do is have you reflect on your own past dogs. What were the lessons that maybe you missed that possibly you could be present to today? We're a little bit sad because we heard there's a possibility you might not have subscribed yet. There's a lot of great dog training videos coming your way, right? Just hit the subscribe button and be sure to turn on that notification bell so you don't miss a single one. Absolutely.